The morning started like any other for Lisa. She packed her camera bag with extra care, checking each lens twice before zipping it closed. The weather forecast had promised clear skies for her photography trip to the Rocky Mountains. She wanted to capture the elk migration that happened every October, and this was supposed to be the perfect day. Lisa drove for 3 hours to reach the remote hiking trail. The park ranger at the entrance booth smiled and handed her a trail map. "Beautiful day for photography," he said. "Just remember, weather can change fast up there in the mountains." She nodded and thanked him, then started her hike with confidence. The trail wound through thick pine forests and across bubbling streams. Lisa stopped every few minutes to take photos of the golden autumn leaves and distant mountain peaks. Her camera clicked steadily as she documented the stunning wilderness. By noon, she had hiked deeper into the mountains than she had ever gone before. The elk were nowhere to be seen, but the scenery was breathtaking. She ate her packed lunch beside a small lake, feeling peaceful and happy. This was exactly what she needed. After months of working in the busy city. Around 2 in the afternoon, Lisa noticed the first clouds rolling in. They looked harmless enough, just fluffy white clouds drifting across the blue sky. She kept walking and taking photos, not worried about a little cloud cover. In fact, cloudy skies often made for better photography, but the clouds grew darker and thicker with each passing hour. By 4 o'clock, the sky had turned an ominous gray color. Lisa checked her phone and saw that she had no signal. The weather app wouldn't update, and her GPS seemed to be having trouble finding her location. The first snowflakes started falling around 5 o'clock. Lisa looked up at the sky with concern. Snow in October wasn't completely unusual in the mountains, but the weather forecast had said nothing about it. She decided it was time to head back to her car. That's when she realized she had a problem. The trail markers were getting harder to see in the growing darkness and falling snow. Lisa pulled out her map and compass, trying to figure out which direction would lead her back to the parking lot. But everything looked different now. Covered in a thin layer of white, the snow began falling harder. What started as gentle flakes quickly turned into a heavy, wet snowfall that soaked through her jacket. Lisa's hands grew numb as she tried to operate her camera and navigation tools. She put her camera away to protect it and focused on finding her way back, but the snow kept getting worse. Soon, Lisa was walking through snow that reached her knees. Each step became a struggle, and her hiking boots weren't designed for this kind of weather. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and making it even harder to see where she was going. By 6 o'clock, Lisa was genuinely scared. She had been walking for over an hour, but couldn't find any familiar landmarks. The snow was falling so heavily that she could barely see 10 feet in front of her. Her phone was completely dead now, and the compass in her hands was shaking because her fingers were trembling so badly. She knew she was in serious trouble. The temperature was dropping fast, and she was already soaked to the skin. Her lightweight hiking clothes were no match for this sudden blizzard. Lisa had read enough survival stories to know that hypothermia could set in quickly. In conditions like these, just when panic started to creep in, she saw something that made her heart jump with relief. Through the swirling snow, she spotted a faint orange glow about 50 yards ahead. It looked like a tent with a light inside. Lisa pushed through the deep snow as fast as she could, her legs burning with effort. When she reached the tent, she could hear someone moving around inside. Lisa hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should disturb whoever was camping there. But another gust of icy wind reminded her that she didn't have much choice. She would freeze to death if she tried to continue in this storm. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Is anyone there?" The movement inside the tent stopped. Then she heard a man's voice, cautious but not unfriendly. "Who's out there? My name is Lisa. I'm lost in the storm. I think I'm in serious trouble." There was a moment of silence. Then the tent zipper opened and a face appeared. The man looked to be in his 30s, with dark hair and kind eyes. He was wearing a warm fleece jacket and looked like he knew what he was doing in the wilderness. "You look half frozen," he said, concern evident in his voice. Get inside before you get frostbite. Lisa didn't need to be asked twice. She crawled into the tent, grateful to be out of the wind and snow. The inside was small but warm, heated by a small camping stove. The man zipped the tent closed behind her and handed her a towel. "I'm Jake," he said. "I work for the Park Service. I was doing a trail survey when this storm hit out of nowhere." Lisa introduced herself while trying to dry off her wet hair and clothes. Jake gave her a spare jacket to put on over her soaked shirt. The warmth felt amazing after hours of being cold and wet. "The Weather Service didn't predict this storm," Jake said, shaking his head. "These sudden blizzards are dangerous. You're lucky you found me." Lisa looked around the small tent. It was clearly designed for one person, not two. There was one sleeping bag, a small camp stove, and just enough space for them to sit without touching. She felt awkward about intruding on his campsite, but she was also incredibly grateful to be alive. "I don't want to impose," Lisa said, "but I don't think I can make it back to my car in this weather." Jake looked at her seriously. "You definitely can't travel in this storm. The snow is already to feet deep and getting deeper. We'll have to wait it out together, outside." The wind howled louder, and Lisa could hear more snow piling up against the tent walls. She realized that this small tent might be the only thing standing between her and freezing too. Death in the wilderness. She had never been more grateful for the kindness of a stranger. Lisa woke up to the sound of wind still howling outside the tent. She had barely slept, partly because of the storm and partly because she was sharing such a small space with a complete stranger. Jake was already awake, checking his radio and trying to get a signal. "Any luck?" Lisa asked. Sitting up in the sleeping bag they had awkwardly shared to stay warm. Jake shook his head. "Nothing but static. The storm is too heavy for radio waves to get through properly." He looked worried as he glanced at their limited supplies. "We need to be smart about our food and water." Lisa felt a knot form in her stomach. She had only packed snacks for a day hike, and Jake's camping supplies were meant for one person on a short trip. They had maybe a day's worth of food if they were careful. "How long do these storms usually last?" Lisa asked. "Hard to say. Could be a day, could be a week. Mountain weather is unpredictable." Jake started organizing their supplies, counting energy bars and instant soup packets. "The good news is we have plenty of snow for water. The bad news is we're going to get pretty hungry." Throughout the morning, they took turns melting snow in Jake's small pot. The process was slow and used up their fuel quickly. Lisa watched Jake work and noticed how calm he stayed despite their situation. He seemed to know exactly what to do to keep them alive. "You're really good at this survival stuff," Lisa said as Jake rationed their breakfast into two small portions. "I've been working in the wilderness for 8 years, Jake replied. "You learn to prepare for anything. What about you? What do you do when you're not getting lost in blizzards?" Lisa smiled despite their circumstances. "I'm a photographer. I take pictures of nature and wildlife for magazines. That's actually why I was out here, trying to photograph the elk migration." "Did you see any elk before the storm hit?" Jake asked, genuinely interested. "No, but I got some beautiful shots of the autumn leaves and mountains." Lisa pulled out her camera, which she had protected carefully in her waterproof bag. "Want to see?" For the next hour, they looked through Lisa's photos together. Jake pointed out different plants and animals in the background that Lisa hadn't noticed while taking the pictures. He knew the names of every tree and bird species, and he told her stories about the wildlife that lived in these mountains. "This is incredible," Jake said, looking at a photo of sunlight streaming through the forest. "You have a real gift. You see things differently than most people." Lisa felt a warm feeling in her chest that had nothing to do with the heater. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from someone who knows these mountains so well." As the day wore on, they had to face the reality of their situation. The storm showed no signs of stopping, and they were running low on fuel for the heater. When night fell, the temperature dropped so much that their breath formed clouds inside the tent. "We need to share body heat," Jake said awkwardly. "I know. It's uncomfortable, but it's the only way to stay warm enough." Lisa nodded. Understanding the seriousness of their situation, they zipped their sleeping bags together and lay close to each other, fully clothed. At first, it felt strange and uncomfortable, but as the night grew colder, Lisa was grateful for Jake's warmth. "Tell me about your work," Lisa said, trying to distract herself from how cold she was getting. "What's it like being a park ranger?" Jake's voice was quiet in the darkness. "I love it. Every day is different. Sometimes I'm fixing trails. Sometimes I'm helping lost hikers. Sometimes I'm studying wildlife patterns. It's never boring. Do you ever get lonely out here by yourself?" There was a pause before Jake answered. "Sometimes. But I prefer it to being around people who don't understand why I love this place so much. The mountains are peaceful. They don't judge you or expect you to be someone you're not." Lisa understood what he meant. "I feel the same way when I'm taking pictures, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They talked for hours that night, sharing stories about their lives and dreams. Lisa learned that Jake had grown up in a small town and had always felt more comfortable outdoors than indoors. Jake discovered that Lisa had traveled all over the world for her photography, but had never felt as connected to a place as she did in these mountains. On the third morning, Lisa woke up to find Jake already awake, watching her face in the dim light. There was something different in his eyes, something gentle and caring that made her heart skip a beat. "You were shivering in your sleep," he said softly. "Are you okay?" Lisa realized she was pressed close against his chest, and his arms were wrapped around her protectively. Instead of feeling embarrassed, she felt safe and cared for in a way she hadn't experienced in years. "I'm okay now," she whispered back. They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other as the storm continued outside. Lisa felt something changing between them, something deeper than just two people helping each other survive. She had never connected with someone so quickly and completely. When they finally got up and started their daily routine of melting snow and rationing food, there was an easy comfort between them. They worked together naturally, as if they had been partners for years instead of strangers for just 3 days. "I never expected to meet someone like you," Lisa said as they shared their small breakfast. Jake looked at her with those same gentle eyes. "I never expected to meet someone like you either, even under these circumstances." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their small tent, something beautiful was beginning to bloom. On the fourth morning, Lisa woke up to something she hadn't heard in days: silence. The constant howling of wind had stopped, and she could hear birds chirping outside the tent. Jake was already awake, listening carefully to the sounds of the forest. "I think the storm is finally breaking," he said with relief in his voice. "But we're not out of danger yet." When they unzipped the tent and looked outside, Lisa gasped. The world had been completely transformed. Snow covered everything, in a thick white blanket that came up to their waists. The trees looked like they were wearing heavy white coats, and the landscape was both beautiful and terrifying. "How are we ever going to get out of here?" Lisa asked, staring at the deep snow that surrounded their tent. Jake put on his boots and stepped outside to test the snow depth. It came up to his thighs, and he sank down with each step. "We'll need to wait for the snow to settle and compact. Right now, it's too soft and deep to travel safely." Lisa felt a mix of disappointment and relief. Part of her wanted to get back to civilization and safety, but another part of her wasn't ready to leave this small world she had been sharing with Jake. They spent the morning digging out around the tent and creating a small area where they could move around. Jake showed Lisa how to read the sky and predict weather patterns by looking at the clouds and wind direction. "See how those clouds are moving from the west?" Jake pointed to the sky. "That usually means the weather will stay clear for at least another day or two." Lisa found herself watching Jake's face as he explained these things to her. She noticed the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the wilderness and how patient he was when teaching her survival skills. She had never met someone who seemed so at peace with himself and his surroundings. "You really love this place, don't you?" Lisa said as they worked together to gather firewood from fallen branches. "It's more than love," Jake replied, looking around at the snow-covered forest. "This place is part of who I am. When I'm out here, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." Lisa understood that feeling completely. I feel the same way when I'm behind my camera, capturing moments like these. It's like the whole world makes sense. As the day went on, they fell into an easy rhythm together. Jake would explain something about wilderness survival, and Lisa would show him how to see the beauty in small details. The way ice crystals form on pine needles, or how the light changed throughout the day. They were teaching each other different ways of seeing the same world. That afternoon, while Jake was checking their supplies, Lisa noticed him looking at her with a strange expression. When she asked what was wrong, he shook his head and looked away. "Nothing's wrong," he said quietly. "I was just thinking about how different things will be when we get back to our normal lives." Lisa felt a pang in her chest. She had been thinking the same thing. In just a few days, they would go back to being strangers living in different cities. The thought made her feel empty inside. "Do you think we would have met under normal circumstances?" Lisa asked. Jake considered this. "Seriously, probably not. I spend most of my time alone in the wilderness, and you travel all over the world. Our paths never would have crossed. Maybe that's why this happened," Lisa said softly. "Maybe we were meant to meet this way." Jake looked at her with those gentle eyes that had become so familiar. "You really believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore," Lisa admitted. "All I know is that I've never felt this connected to someone before." As evening approached, they sat outside the tent watching the sunset paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Lisa had her camera out, but for once, she wasn't taking pictures. She was just experiencing the moment. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Double quotes, "Yes, it is," Jake said. But when Lisa looked at him, he was looking at her instead of the sunset. That night, as they lay in their shared sleeping bag, Lisa found herself memorizing every detail of Jake's face in the dim light. She noticed the small scar on his chin, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, and the gentle way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. "Jake," she said quietly. "Yeah, I'm scared about getting rescued." Lisa shook her head. "I'm scared about what happens after we get rescued. I'm scared about going back to our separate lives and pretending this never happened." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and gently touched her cheek. "This did happen, Lisa. Whatever this is between us, it's real." Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes. But what if it only feels real because we're in this extreme situation? What if when we get back to normal life, we realize it was just our minds playing tricks on us? "Do you think that's what this is?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa looked into his eyes and saw the same fear and hope that she was feeling. "No," she said honestly. "I think this is the most real thing that's ever happened to me." Jake smiled and pulled her closer. "Then let's not worry about tomorrow. Let's just focus on right now." As they lay there together, watching the stars through the tent's small window, Lisa felt something she had never experienced before. It wasn't just attraction or even love. It was a deep sense of recognition, as if she had found a part of herself she didn't even know was missing. Outside, the mountain was quiet and peaceful, wrapped in its blanket of snow. Inside the tent, to people who had been strangers less than a week ago, we're discovering that sometimes the most important connections happen in the most unexpected ways. On the sixth morning, Lisa woke up to a sound she hadn't heard in days, the distant rumble of helicopter blades. Cutting through the mountain air, Jake was already sitting up, listening intently to the approaching sound. "That's a search and rescue helicopter," he said, quickly putting on his boots. "They're looking for us." Lisa felt her heart racing, but not with the relief she expected. Instead, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and dread. They were about to be rescued, but that also meant their time together was coming to an end. Jake grabbed his emergency flare from his pack and rushed outside. Lisa followed him, squinting in the bright morning sunlight reflecting off the snow. The helicopter was still far away, but getting closer with each passing second. There, Jake pointed to a red helicopter moving slowly across the valley, searching the mountainside. He lit the flare and held it high above his head, creating a bright red smoke signal against the white snow. The helicopter changed direction immediately, heading straight toward them. Lisa watched it approach with mixed feelings. She should be happy they were about to be safe and warm again. But all she could think about was how this meant saying goodbye to Jake. "They see us," Jake said, his voice filled with relief. "We're going to be okay." The helicopter circled overhead, before finding a place to land about 50 yards away from their tent. Two rescue workers jumped out and trudged through the deep snow toward them. Lisa noticed how professional and efficient they were, asking questions about their health and checking them for signs of hypothermia or frostbite. "You two are lucky," one of the rescue workers said. "This storm came out of nowhere. We've been searching for 3 days straight." As they packed up their few belongings, Lisa felt like she was in a dream. Everything was happening so fast after days of slow, quiet routine. Jake rolled up the sleeping bag they had shared, and Lisa carefully packed away her camera equipment. Neither of them said much as they prepared to leave their small shelter. The helicopter ride back to civilization felt surreal. Lisa sat next to Jake, but they couldn't talk over the noise of the engine. She looked out the window at the vast wilderness below and tried to process everything that had happened. Just a week ago, she had been a completely different person living a completely different life. They landed at a small airport in the mountain town of Cedar Falls. There was an ambulance waiting, and medical personnel insisted on checking both of them thoroughly. Lisa felt embarrassed by all the attention, but Jake seemed used to emergency situations. "You're both in remarkably good shape," the doctor said after examining them, "a little dehydrated and tired, but nothing serious. You did a good job taking care of each other out there." Lisa and Jake exchanged glances. They had taken care of each other in ways that went far beyond just physical survival. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. Lisa had to contact her family to let them know she was safe, and Jake had to file reports with his supervisor at the Park Service. They were given rooms at a small hotel in town to rest and recover. As evening approached, Lisa found herself sitting alone in her hotel room, staring out the window at the mountains where they had been trapped together. The room felt huge and empty compared to the small tent they had shared. She had a real bed, a hot shower, and all the food she could want, but she felt lonelier than she had in years. There was a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, Jake was standing there with 2 cups of coffee from the hotel lobby. He looked as lost and uncomfortable as she felt. "I couldn't sleep," he said simply. "Kept thinking about how quiet it is without the wind." Lisa invited him in, and they sat by the window, sipping their coffee and looking out at the mountains. The silence between them was different now, not the comfortable silence they had shared in the tent, but an awkward uncertainty about what came next. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jake finally spoke, "about whether this is real or just because of the extreme situation." Lisa's heart started beating faster. "What do you think?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I think I've been alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to really connect with someone. But with you, everything felt natural, like we fit together." "I felt it too," Lisa admitted. "But now, back in the real world, I keep wondering if I imagine it all." Jake looked at her seriously. "Do you think you imagine it?" Lisa studied his face, looking for the same gentleness and understanding she had seen in the tent. It was still there, but somehow it felt different now, more uncertain, more guarded. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Everything feels so different here. You seem different. I feel different." Jake nodded slowly. "Maybe we both need time to figure out what's real and what was just the situation we were in." The next morning, Lisa packed her things and prepared to drive back to the city. Jake stopped by her hotel room to say goodbye. They stood awkwardly in the doorway, not sure how to say farewell to someone who had become so important to them in such a short time. "Take care of yourself," Jake said, giving her a brief hug. "You too," Lisa replied, fighting back tears. As she drove away from Cedar Falls, Lisa watched Jake get smaller in her rearview mirror until he disappeared completely. She felt like she was leaving behind a part of herself, but she also wondered if she was being foolish. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe they needed time to figure out what was real. The drive back to the city took 4 hours, and with each mile, Lisa felt the magic of their time together fading. By the time she reached her apartment, she almost convinced herself that the whole experience had been like a beautiful dream. That feels real until you wake up. But late that night, as she lay in her own bed for the first time in a week, Lisa stared at the ceiling and knew that what she had felt with Jake was more real than anything else in her life. The question was, did he feel the same way? 2 weeks had passed since Lisa returned to her apartment in the city, but she felt like a stranger in her own life. She tried to go back to her normal routine, editing photos, meeting with clients, working on new projects, but everything felt flat and meaningless compared to those days in the mountains. Her friends noticed the change in her immediately. "You seem different," her best friend Kelly said over coffee, more distant. "Like your mind is somewhere else?" Lisa didn't know how to explain what had happened. How could she tell anyone that she had fallen in love with a man she barely knew? During a survival situation? It sounded crazy even to her own ears. "I just had an intense experience during my photography trip," Lisa said vaguely. "It's taking some time to process." But processing wasn't helping. Every night, Lisa lay in bed thinking about Jake. She wondered what he was doing, if he was thinking about her too, or if he had already moved on and forgotten about their time together. The uncertainty was eating away at her. Her work suffered because she couldn't concentrate. She had dozens of beautiful photos from her trip before the storm, but when she looked at them on her computer screen, they seemed lifeless. All she could think about was how Jake had looked at those same mountains, how he had taught her to see the forest in a completely different way. One evening, Lisa was editing photos when she came across a picture she had taken of Jake while he was teaching her about tracking animal footprints in the snow. She had captured him in a moment when he wasn't aware of the camera, his face focused and peaceful as he pointed out deer tracks near their tent. Looking at his photo, Lisa felt a physical ache in her chest. She realized that she wasn't just missing Jake, she was missing the person she had been when she was with him in the mountains. She had felt more alive and authentic than she had in years. That night, Lisa made a decision that surprised even herself. She called in sick to work the next day and drove back to Cedar Falls. She didn't have a plan, and she wasn't even sure if Jake would want to see her. All she knew was that she couldn't keep living with the uncertainty. The drive to the mountains took 4 hours, and with each mile, Lisa felt more nervous. What if Jake thought she was crazy for coming back? What if he had already decided that their connection wasn't real? What if he had moved on with someone else? When she arrived in Cedar Falls, Lisa went straight to the ranger station where Jake worked. Her heart was pounding as she walked through the front door. The receptionist looked up with a friendly smile. "I'm looking for Jake Morrison," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He's out on a trail maintenance job today," the receptionist replied, "but he should be back around 4 o'clock. Can I take a message?" Lisa checked her watch. It was only 2 o'clock. She had 2 hours to wait and worry about what she was going to say to him. She spent the time walking around the small town, trying to calm her nerves. Cedar Falls was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and she felt like an outsider. Maybe that's what she was, an outsider who had convinced herself that she belonged in Jake's world. At 4:30, Lisa returned to the ranger station. Jake's truck was in the parking lot, and she could see him through the window, filling out paperwork at his desk. He looked tired and a little sad, not at all like the confident man she had met in the wilderness. Lisa took a deep breath and walked inside. When Jake looked up and saw her, his expression changed from surprise to something that looked like hope. "Lisa," he said, standing up quickly, "what are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," she said simply. "I needed to know if what we had was real." Jake looked around the busy office, then gestured toward the door. "Let's talk outside." They walked to a quiet spot behind the building where they could see the mountains in the distance. Jake seemed nervous, running his hands through his hair the way he had done in the tent when he was thinking hard about something. "I've been thinking about you every day," he admitted, "but I convinced myself that it was better to leave things the way they were." You have your life in the city, and I have mine here. But what if I don't want the life I had in the city? Lisa asked. What if I want something different? Jake looked at her with those gentle eyes she had missed so much. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've been miserable for 2 weeks without you. I'm saying that I've never felt as connected to someone as I felt connected to you in that tent. I'm saying that I think we're meant to be together. Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You really drove all the way back here just to tell me that, Lisa nodded. I had to know if you felt the same way. Jake smiled for the first time since she had arrived. I've been miserable too. I kept telling myself that it was just the extreme situation, but the truth is, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. Lisa felt tears of relief forming in her eyes. So what do we do now? I don't know. Jake said honestly, your whole life is in the city, your career, your friends, your family. My career can move anywhere, Lisa said. I'm a freelance photographer. I can work from anywhere I want. And maybe it's time for me to build a life in a place that actually feels like home. Jake reached out and took her hands. Are you sure? Mountain life isn't easy. The winters are long and harsh, and the nearest city is hours away. Lisa looked at the mountains surrounding them, then back at Jake's face. I'm sure, in that tent, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not just because of the location, but because of who I was with. Jake pulled her closer and kissed her gently. I love you, Lisa. I think I love you from the moment you stumbled into my tent. Half frozen and completely lost. I love you too, Lisa whispered against his lips. And I'm not lost anymore. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. As they stood, they're holding each other, with the mountains watching over them. Lisa knew that their story was just beginning. She had come to the wilderness looking for elk to photograph, but instead she had found something much more precious. She had found her home in the arms of the man who had become her everything during the coldest nights of her life. The tent that had sheltered them during the storm was long gone, but the bond they had formed inside it would last forever. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with getting lost, and sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with sharing warmth in the darkness.